Thank you very much, Sergeant at Arms, for your diligent handling of the podium. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, like others have done before me, before I speak to this resolution, I wish to extend condolences to the family of Senator the Honorable Thomas. And Mr. Speaker, I've read several articles in social media pertaining to this particular gentleman, and without going into details, maybe just like many other people in St. Lucia, I share some of that pain, because while he was very, very young, I too lost a son. And when I read the stories, some of the stories were similar. So I do understand a lot of the pain. Mr. Speaker, I also wish, on behalf of my constituents, to express condolences to the pastor and his family, and others who have spoken before me, Mr. Speaker, spoke about tragic...
Honorable Member Dan Renouf. Continue, ma'am. Continue.
Yes, spoke about other tragedies, and I share, Mr. Speaker, in the expression of grief. Mr. Speaker, the Minister for Finance presented a motion which will cause this Parliament to guarantee the borrowing of $30 million from the Caribbean Development Bank. And $30 million, Mr. Speaker, amounts to about 80,100,000 EC dollars. And while this amount is divided into the COVID response and also fiscal stabilization, it is very instructive, Mr. Speaker, that yet again we are incurring more debt, and while we are dealing with a crisis situation, we need to be sure that this money is being managed carefully. According to the government, Mr. Speaker, the money is to be used for policy reform initiatives designed to support St. Lucia's COVID-19 crisis response and also achieving fiscal stability. I want to spend some time, Mr. Speaker, to speak about the first aspect, the implementation of policy reform initiatives designed to support St. Lucia's COVID-19 crisis response. And I ask a few questions. What are the policy reform initiatives that are designed by this government to support the COVID-19 crisis response, which the money in hell is referring to or will refer to? Or what is it the government will do with the money? What are the different policy reform initiatives? I listened to the Prime Minister when he presented, and he spoke a lot about COVID-19. And Mr. Speaker, while some may be surprised and amazed, I was not amazed when the Prime Minister took a road down partisan political, the path of partisan politics to suggest that a particular event is what caused the spike in the COVID cases in St. Lucia. This is once again the utterances of a Prime Minister who does not have the kind of sensitivity to exactly what's happening in St. Lucia with the COVID-19 response, Mr. Speaker. This is the same Prime Minister, even after the state of emergency laws were passed, this is the same Prime Minister who was all around St. Lucia without a mask, actually breaking the law then. When I said so in Parliament the last time, he tried to stop me, but it was in the law then. And then he comes now, instead of being a Prime Minister who comes to the Parliament and say, listen, this thing is serious, how can we come together and pull together? But he goes down the partisan political way. Mr. Speaker, I reject what the Prime Minister tried to suggest, that an activity which was a protest activity is what caused the spike in COVID-19. And Mr. Speaker, as unfortunate as it is, the family of the deceased, and as sad as it is, Mr. Speaker, we cannot in the Parliament sanction the words of a Prime Minister who seemed to suggest that there is a big connection between the activities of an organization and the untimely demise of their loved one.
Now this one, sir, I want you to withdraw that statement. He didn't say that one.
Mr. Speaker, I said his utterances suggest...
Do not make any connection between what the Prime Minister said this morning and the announcement this afternoon of a death.
Okay, Mr. Speaker, can I rephrase?
No, I want you to withdraw that statement and move on.
I withdraw that statement. But can I rephrase, Mr. Speaker?
Move on.
I'm going to move on to say, Mr. Speaker, that this morning the Prime Minister tried to suggest that an activity or protest which was held is responsible for the increase in COVID-19 cases in St. Lucia, Mr. Speaker. That is what he said. So, Mr.
Honorable
Speaker,
members, honorable members, honorable members, honorable members.
I withdrew.
No, that's fine. It has been almost 2 hours. Not a single word has been spoken by the members sitting. And I've been monitoring this, and I've allowed you to make your presentation. Prime Minister presented. Not a word was said by a member sitting. Leader of the opposition spoke. Not a word was said by a member sitting. Member for the Linda spoke. Not a word was said by a member sitting. We're not starting again this afternoon. Allow the member for Viewford North to be heard in silence. Full stop.
Mr. Speaker, the government, and once again I ask the question, what are the policy reform initiatives that are designed by this government to support COVID-19 crisis response? Because in the motion, it indicates that the money is for policy reform initiatives designed to support St. Lucian's COVID-19 crisis response. That's one of the aspects of the motion. So I ask the question, where are the policy, where are the initiatives that are designed to support St. Lucia's COVID-19 crisis response? The Prime Minister has not presented those initiatives. As far as I'm concerned, Mr. Speaker, the government's policies and policy actions so far in response to the medical evidence have been knee-jerk and much more of a sort of soap opera, Mr. Speaker. The responses to the medical situation relating to COVID-19 on the ground were poorly coordinated responses. So while the doctors and the CMO and the medical people came out with the evidence, the medical evidence, the policy responses of this government were knee-jerk and poorly coordinated, Mr. Speaker. Many of their policy actions have had to be pulled back. Some of them clothed in boastful showmanship. Others protested against and withdrawn. And some, through draconian meandering through the legislature, through antics in the Senate, have our Senate in the history books of St. Lucia, and I dare say, in my opinion, for many of the wrong reasons. Mr. Speaker, I await the new directions of this government for supporting the COVID-19 crisis response. And here is what has happened so far. Here is what has happened so far, Mr. Speaker. Let us look at, for me to adequately argue, Mr. Speaker, that the government's policy response has not been adequate, and that in this debate, they have not presented the new policy responses which would give credence to the loan, I must take some time, Mr. Speaker, to review their policy responses and reactions so far. And permit me, Mr. Speaker, a few minutes. We know the first case was confirmed on March 13th, 7 days after there was a curfew, 11 to 5, non-commercial activity suspended. March 23rd, state of emergency, closure of incoming flights due to what was happening overseas with the flights. March 29th, ban the sale of alcoholic beverages, as well as suspending all liquor licenses, closing of all bars. March 31st, 24-hour curfew. Follow me well, Mr. Speaker. In April, there was a mix between curfew and all kinds of things. NIC came in with some contributions. Various stores were allowed to operate. Everyone was asking, what is the rationale for this store opening? What's the rationale for that other store not opening? A confusion of policy responses, Mr. Speaker. And again, while the doctors, the medical fraternity, the CMO came out and said, X number tested positive, Y number have recovered. I'm focusing on the policy responses of the government. And these responses have been confusing, to say the least. And in April, there was a ban on alcohol. April 28th, the IMF Executive Board approves millions for St. Lucia and other islands. So the millions started to, the approval of millions, Mr. Speaker. And if you add up all of the monies that we've spoken about when we've come to this parliament for COVID-19 response, they do not equate to what the member for Miku South and the Prime Minister presented this morning. This morning, the Prime Minister said that he can account for $15.4 million, and he gave various expenditure heads. But that's not close to the amounts that we have heard about in this parliament. In May, Mr. Speaker, the ministry permitted some businesses to resume full operations. In June, flights resumed. So from June 4th to July, the lifting of curfews, flights are coming in now. So the lifting of curfews, reopening of cinemas, sporting and early childhood, and while I spoke about the soap opera, we are number one in the world, and New York and so on, they are following us. And all kinds of policy responses that did not speak to the seriousness of the medical issues, Mr. Speaker. We heard all sorts of things. In September, the St. Lucia Tourism Authority announced easing of restrictions for visitors. And I'm speaking about policy responses, not talking about what the CMO said in terms of the numbers and the hospitals and so on. I'm coming to the hospitals. So in September, the policy response of the Tourism Authority, they eased restrictions for visitors. Visitors were allowed to stay at up to 2 of the COVID-19 certified hotels and resorts on the island and may enjoy water-based activities. So en septembre, Mr. Speaker, après juin, 4 juin, les plaines commencent à tuer. Le gouvernement a décidé que touristes, yo sa bay touristes ti free up. Yo sa wete un del hotel, avec yo sa aller différents jouer glow différents bay comme ça. And Mr. Speaker, we saw on social media the evidence of tourists and their activities in the country. The evidence is there. Returning nationals and residents will be required to undergo 14-day quarantine. And the issue of returning nationals has a whole set of row, Mr. Speaker, the policy responses to that. In October, boom, minibus driver all over the place, Mr. Speaker. And they were linking it to the constituency which I represent. They said it was from Beaufort North. The bus carried people from Beaufort North to a rally. And they were all over the place, trying to create the genesis of an argument that it is the Labour Party that's spiking COVID. And there was a big change. We had the number plate of the bus. All of a sudden, there's no medical secrecy anymore. The number plate of the bus, where it come from, all kinds of things. Because in my view, Mr. Speaker, they were trying very hard to connect it to the St. Lucia Labour Party. But since they were saying number plates of buses and so on, a voice came out from deep inside and to say that but I was with the Prime Minister and a popular talk show host. So if I'm COVID-19 positive, go check the Prime Minister too. So if the bus driver was a spreader, as they were claiming, maybe the Prime Minister was a spreader too. So you see, you see when they begin to weave their web of deception, how it comes back to them. So in October, Mr. Speaker, this whole thing about the bus and all of that, and the Castries Comprehensive Secondary School, all of these things made public. And we know that on October 22nd, the Ministry of Education ordered schools to remain closed.
On a point of order, Mr. Speaker, the member is saying that the Prime Minister is a spreader based on social media comments. I mean, where does...
Honorable Member, can you restart, because he did not say, he said in conversation with that somebody, wherever it came from, he didn't say the Prime Minister is a spreader. He said somebody said that if the bus driver was a spreader, that person allegedly said he was with the Prime Minister. And therefore, if he is a spreader, then we need to check the Prime Minister too. He's not saying the Prime Minister was a spreader.
No, Mr. Speaker, the point I am making is
let me
that
hear you.
the honorable member
Hello?
How do we know? Because, Mr. Speaker, it is what is said and how it is interpreted in this House. And I think the member needs to clarify what he is saying there, because the average listener will take it that you are saying that if the bus driver was a spreader, that the PM is a spreader also. That is what I gathered from the statement made by the honorable member. And he needs to clarify what he's saying, because I don't know that the PM has tested positive to COVID-19. But the evidence is that a bus operator tested positive for COVID, and all the records are there to show the traces that was done and who is linked back to who. So the member needs to clarify what he's saying there or withdraw the statement.
Honorable Member, I would have interrupted you before, but not on that point. But to get you back, because I think that you're starting to move a little beyond the motion.
Okay, Mr. Speaker, I am establishing here that the reason which the government has given for coming to the House to use part of $30 million US, part of the reason is for policy reform initiatives designed to support St. Lucia's COVID-19 crisis response. The other reason is to achieve fiscal stability. I am establishing that the government's history of policy initiatives is checkered, and I'm also saying that because of this, the government has not provided to us the policy reform initiatives which will cause it to come to this House and give reasons for borrowing $30 million. So all of what I'm talking about the policy responses of the government to COVID-19. In relation to the bus driver, I'm saying here that for the first time, we knew exactly who the Ministry of Health or the doctors had determined had COVID-19 because the bus driver's number plate was made public. I'm saying that the government's, there was a breach right there, because we said before about privacy, all those kinds of things, and then we had a bus driver whose number plate was made public, where he came from was made public, and this very bus driver said that he was in the presence of the Prime Minister. So I'm saying that if the bus driver was COVID-19 positive, it is quite possible that that's what I'm saying, That's why the medical doctors tell you if you're in the presence of somebody, go and take a test and all of that. So I'm not misleading the House or anything like that. I don't know where the member get the idea that I'm saying something that I can't prove. Was he not in the presence of the Prime Minister? Was he not? And if he was in the presence of the Prime Minister and he tested positive, isn't it possible? Because that's what the doctors are saying. I'm not saying anything crazy here. And what's your point of order anyway?
Honorable member,
Sorry, Mr. Speaker. Yes.
Move on.
Sorry. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, what I'm saying here is that the responses of this government to this crisis, mania gouvernement za traité avec Covid là. Yo pas ka moutoué qui yo savent ça yo ka fait. Si moi avec docteur, ka venir si moi ka dit combien gens Covid yo a joindre. Combien moun yo a testé. Combien l'autre moun qui en quarantine. Combien moun qui en isolation. Mais c'est travail gouvernement, policy gouvernement pour manger bagay en pays pour faire bagay saine sauve pour goumer avec ça fait Covid là. C'est pas travail si et moi avec ces docteurs. Travail c'est pour tester, mettre quarantine avec faire différents bagay comme ça, avec parler avec gouvernement, avec mettre ordre. Ça moi ka dire c'est jodi a gouvernement vient au parlement avec yo ka prêter 30 millions de dollars américains et que raison yo ka prêter l'argent ça là, c'est pour dire yo ka changer bagay policy en affaire Covid-19 là. Et moi ka dit gouvernement pas encore ben nous, c'est différentes directions en gouvernement Covid-19 là qui yo dit yo ka faire. Ça moi ka dire c'est tout ça vous avez gouvernement a fait, c'est mistake. Yo ka fait un bagay avec yo ka virer par apologie parce que yo pas te fait bien. Yo fermé en prendre licence pour moun vendre mom, yo virer dit yo ka iladje parce que ça a babie ça a dit ça dedans. Ça me ka dire c'est pour le si ce gouvernement fait ou ka ouais la pateni kachi là dedans. Me commencer par là-bas ça Mr. Speaker. Moi même commencer avec péché avec fama. This government in its policy response to the medical evidence, look at what they did. When they closed down the country, farmers do not go and tie the cows and tie the animals. I'm just showing the confusion with this government in terms of its policy response. So where in this are they explaining to us the new policy responses? And that's what I'm looking for. And what I'm saying to you, Mr. Speaker, is instead of dealing with the thing in a scientific way, taking the evidence from the CMO and dealing with it in a scientific way, this government was showboating, coming to Parliament, saying they are the #1 in the world, how New York is following them, and everybody, they are #1. And the Prime Minister, you know, the Prime Minister takes the show to another level, saying that's the best CMO ever. You ever heard Prime Minister, with all the medical expertise we have, and that's a policy response, Mr. Speaker. It's nothing else. When the leader of the country, in the middle of a pandemic, comes to showboat and say that's the best CMO ever, it signals to the country that this government is not ready with its policy response. And that is what the motion speaks to. Mr. Speaker, another policy response of this government, and I'm waiting to hear how they're going to adjust this one. Because the motion speaks to a new direction by the government in this COVID response. Mr. Speaker, here is how they responded. I don't know where the scientific evidence came from, and again, I'm going back to the motion, you know, Mr. Speaker. I'm tying everything in, because I know you always want us to tie it in. I'm going back to the motion to say that it speaks to policy initiatives. And I don't know where the scientific evidence came from. The government and its spokespeople indicated that there is some kind of backdoor theory, that cases are coming through the back door, that fishers are possibly transporting people with cases into St. Lucia. And there is a backdoor theory. So what did they do? On 30th of October, they decided that the fishers should pay. My perception, Mr. Speaker, this time, based on the actions of the government, I believe my perception is that they felt that the fishermen should pay, and not just fishermen, local fishermen. And if you read the Gazette, it said local, and I'm sure there's a deliberate reason for that, Mr. Speaker. It said local fishermen, it didn't say fishers, It said local. So if a fisher coming from St. Croix or any other place came into St. Lucia to a landing site, a fish landing site, they would not have been breaking the law. And you think that's not deliberate, Mr. Speaker? That's deliberate. Local fishermen cannot go to any landing site. So if you're a fisher and you're a sea moss farmer, for 7 days, you could not have gone to do your work. How much did they lose, Mr. Speaker? And that's what I'm looking for, the policy responses. What are the different policy responses? It's so, because they believe it's so easy to just shut down fishers, shut down farmers. It's not so easy to deal with the other sectors. But with one stroke of a pen, you shut them down. And it's the callous way in which the government implemented its policy, Mr. Speaker. So the fishers lost thousands of dollars. That's the government's policy response. And that is what I'm asking the Prime Minister. What are the new ways to deal with these things? They have not told us. I represent fishers, a lot of fishers in Vieux North, Mr. Speaker. And many of them could not go to sea. The fishers who work at Savans Bay, they could not go to sea. These things have to hurt you. That a government can just on its high-handed horse decide for 7 days that fishers are not going to sea. Qui pêche pas qu'à aller parce que yo ka di à quoi dit c'est pêche qui ka mené Jean Covid à tuer. Yo pas ni yon pêche qui test positive for COVID-19. Not one. If they have any today, let me know. Not one fisher has been reported as having tested positive for COVID-19. But they were made to pay. Until the fishers decided, Mr. Speaker, to come to Castries, there were meetings, and all sorts of things were said. But it speaks to the way in which the government handled these policies relating to COVID-19. And as I said before, the government itself, its own policy said it. The tourists can go to water sports, they can, all kinds of things. But our fishers, it's easy to just shut down their operations. So, Mr. Speaker, I ask again, what are the policy suggestions? What are the different policy suggestions or prescriptions that will be used to assist people? And it is this same Prime Minister who told us there is no more money. The country has no more money. There is no more money for social stabilization programs. No more money, Mr. Speaker. So I'm wondering, how would this 30 million US assist in with social stabilization? This government is fond of saying things like, you don't give people money. It's as if there is something strange and diabolic about giving people assistance. And amidst all that, Mr. Speaker, we see what has happened to the new law, the COVID control law. So to me, Mr. Speaker, I go back to the first question that I asked. If this motion is about policy reform initiatives designed to support St. Lucia's COVID-19 crisis response, what are these policy initiatives? The office of the Member of Parliament in Vieux North, and I don't know for the other offices, as a kind of center for where people come for services, Mr. Speaker, there should be a role for these offices. Can we, for example, procure masks on a large scale so that when people come to these offices, the elderly and so on, you can assist them? You can't give everybody everything, but is that a kind of policy response? Can we incentivize, for example, groups, the mothers groups, the sports clubs, and assist them with programs where they can now touch base with their members so that we can push a message of masks and social distancing? In the very same way that the government finds millions and millions of dollars to do all sorts of capital projects, can we find, for example, money to employ young people or anybody who is unemployed to go to every single bus stand with alcohol, with wipes and different things? Can we do that? Can that be a national policy response? Can we, for example, Mr. Speaker, intensify programs like putting standpipes with automatic soap dispensers at every bus stop, so that now we have more and more commuters washing their hands? And these policy responses that can assist, and these are not difficult things, but the policy responses are not, we don't know what they are. We don't know what they are. And Mr. Speaker, you know, some people say the Minister for Health just says what she wants. I will never say that, Mr. Speaker. I know this lady well. We have gone to conferences together, and the Minister for Health does not just say what she wants. I am convinced that the Minister for Health speaks for the government when she says the thing that she says, with the way she says it. And when there is a situation with the way the government responds, the policy response again, to the whole respiratory clinic, and you listen to the response of the Minister for Health, you know why this government does not put people first, Mr. Speaker. You understand why this government does not put people first. And when the Minister for Health sounds like, you know, that's not a big problem. You know, somebody's in the room with water all over the place and so on, and somebody's crying out and people are complaining that it's on Facebook, and you had a kind of response of the Minister for Health, you have to wonder. The horses at DSH have 1,000 times better conditions than what you have at the respiratory clinic. That is the reality, Mr. Speaker. And so if we are talking about COVID-19, and it's a serious situation, but the Prime Minister cannot escape with he being Prime Minister saying all of those things, whichever way he wants, blaming people for having protests, and that's why COVID is spiking. And then you want to come and be serious and say everybody must come on board. It's a serious situation, and that is why the opposition and those who are concerned must ask the government serious questions and be very serious about it. And in closing, Mr. Speaker, I want to say that when in March the leader of the opposition held a press conference and we spoke about COVID-19, early March 5th I think it was, or 3rd, it's the same thing. They were saying it was doom and gloom. We're preaching doom and gloom. It's in the media. We are preaching doom and gloom. When we explained what was happening in China, and we were not hearing from the policymakers of the government, they say we're preaching doom and gloom. If you go to social media, Mr. Speaker, long before any of these ministers of government were out talking about COVID, we were in social media and in our communities, putting flyers all over the place. The member for Castries North joked with me once when he came to Parliament and said, boy, I see you have a video about washing your hands. Lavez la main, lavez la main. We were just joking about it. That is how early we were off the track with COVID-19. So don't tell us that we don't care about these things. I did my video long before you all came out with all of these ads. Long before. So we are playing our part, and we care, and we'll put people first, Mr. Speaker, but I have not seen any evidence of the new policy responses and the new initiatives that this money, the millions of dollars here, should reflect. And I await the Prime Minister's responses to get them. Magadi, Mr. Speaker, janvier for nous savent, qui nous envier pour nous pas moi tout seul, c'est moun qui a travaillé avec moi. Nous commençons à faire COVID-19 éducation ça longtemps. Nous avons mis bagaille les poteaux. Moun qui a passé yo ka oui nous. nous aller tout kay bay moun feyet di yo ça fait Covid là. Nous fait vidéo ka di moun manière pour laver la main yo. Parce que nous concernés. C'est parlementaires à la façade opposition. Si vous regardez les pages Facebook yo, ou ka wè toute qualité bagay nous te ka fait pour ça faire Covid là. Leader opposition mener hand sanitizer by l'école. So we care about what's happening. Mais ça moi ka dire l'argent gouvernement vient prêter ici moi pas ouais qui ça qui neuf yo dit yo kay fait avec toute l'argent ça. Avec comme la coutume moi pas ka trust ça yo ka dit, ma te ka trust ça yo ka dire les figues, les dit yo ka voyer figue en France, ma ka trust li jik toujours bret figue pour arriver France et yo ka dit yo ka market figue à l'hôtel, yo ka market kako, tout qualité bail comme ça. Ma ka trust ça yo ka dit Mr. Speaker, et moi salve, yo pas ko bail réponse le COVID-19 là, je ça là, yo vinn petit. Merci un chat. Thank you Mr. Speaker.